It's Wednesday, so you know what that means. It's time for another News of the Week episode. And these last couple of days, there's definitely some interesting news that come out of MLS, but none bigger than what happened today, because today, MLS has officially released their full schedule for the group stage games in the MLSisback tournament, and they basically lay out the full schedule with the first game between Orlando City versus Inter Miami is going to be taking place at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific time on ESPN, which I don't think there's a lot of big surprise that is the time that is taking place, because, I knew for sure that with such a big game like that, they obviously are going to put it at the prime time spot and put it at the perfect time where everybody's going to watch the game, which is 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific time. Now, talking about the broadcaster for these games, there's going to be 4 different broadcast network. Well, technically 5 broadcast network, because in addition to FS1, Fox is going to also broadcast a selective game, and depending on if you want to count that as a different broadcast, even though they're kind of owned by the same company, you could say that there's 5 different broadcast company that is going to be broadcasting these games. But besides FS1 and Fox, you also have ESPN, TUDN, and also TSN for all those folks that is going to be watching this tournament in Canada. Now, for the TUDN broadcast, I'm hoping they can, of course, put those games also on Twitter. And, as much as I know, I have previously complained about the fact that these MLS game putting on Twitter is not very good, and that the commentator are cringy as hell, and also the stream quality for those Twitter games are not very good. The reason why I want them to have it on Twitter is because since I recently just changed my TV provider from Fubo TV to Sling TV, and since Sling TV does not have 2DN, I'm going to unfortunately have to hope that these 2DN game is going to be available on Twitter. Otherwise, you know what I'm going to have to do, and that I'm going to unfortunately rely on illegal stream, which is not a bad idea, but at the same time, it's also not kind of safe to try to rely on this stream, and that the stream does tend to be a little bit behind the actual action, and some of them are kind of usually not very stable. So hopefully these 2DN game is also going to be on Twitter, and that, I know I'm going to have to suffer and listen to these commentators that just talk nonsense throughout the full 90 minutes, but it's better than doing that than actually just watch an illegal stream that potentially could be a little bit unstable, and it's not safe to do. Now, in terms of the scheduling wise, well, for those people that was worrying the fact that, ever since MLS announced the potential schedule where they have like 3 time slot for these kickoff, one's going to be at 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. There's also the dubious kickoff time of 9 a.m. and 6 a.m. Pacific time, and a lot of teams in the West Coast, including myself as a Quakes fan, was very worried that one of our team is going to be in that dubious honor to have to play a game at 9 a.m. Eastern time and 6 p.m. or 6 a.m. Pacific time. Well, the good news is not every single team is going to do that. In fact, there's only 2 teams that unfortunately gets the dubious honor to do that coming out of the Western Conference. You got RSL that unfortunately will have to play against SKC at 6 a.m. Pacific time, 9 a.m. Eastern time, which means that for RSL fans, they're unfortunately going to have to watch their team play one of their game at 7 a.m. their local time. And then, of course, the inevitable. Unfortunately, we have to have a team that is playing in the Pacific time zone, and that they're going to have to play at 9 a.m. Eastern and 6 a.m. Pacific time. And that honor goes to the defending champion Seattle Sounders, that unfortunately they will have to play their matchup between them and FC Dallas at 9 a.m. and 6 a.m. Pacific time. So, yeah, it's unfortunate that Sounders fan will have to endure it, but I will say this for Sounders fan, at least you're the heavy favorites of actually winning your group. So I don't think it even though you unfortunately are put in that circumstances, I don't think that they need to really worry about missing one match and think that they of course might not have a chance to move on, because keep in mind these games are played behind closed door, and it's not like these games there's going to be some fans that is going to be going to these games and supporting their teams like that. But yeah, again, the good news is there's only a handful of games that's going to be happening in the morning. In fact, there's actually only going to be 7 games that's going to be happening in the morning, which means that pretty much for half of the tournament during the group stage match, only half of those times there's going to actually be 9 a.m. kickoff time, and that the rest of those games are going to be during the evening time. Now, MLS has also revised the round of 16 berth, and Group A will now have top 3 teams automatically move on to the next round. This has been something that a lot of fans has been complaining, especially fans that is in that Group A group that are complaining the fact that they are getting such an unfair advantage compared to other teams, knowing the fact that other teams maybe have a 50% chance of moving on. We probably have less than a 50% chance of moving on, since only the top 2 team out of the 6 team in our group is going to be moving on, and that's definitely not a 50% chance of us moving on. So I guess MLS saw that, and they feel like, since that is such an unfair advantage, they might as well just kind of fix where every single group will now have half of the team move on into the next round. And that is exactly what's going to happen with Group A, that now they will have top 3 teams and half of the group will move on, and that 4th place team actually still have a chance to move on depending on if they are the best 3rd place team out there. And that because of the fact that one of the berth has now gone to Group A, that means I think now only 3 of the top 3rd place team is going to be moving on into the next round, compared to 4 of the top 3rd place team that is going to be moving on into the next round. USL Championship has also revised their 2020 season schedule. So I know I haven't talked a lot about the USL Championship and the way that they are going to restart, other than the fact that I mentioned they're going to restart in July 11th. Well, their schedule is kind of a little bit similar to the MLSisback tournament, but only it's kind of like twice as long as the MLSisback tournament, and that they're actually not going to be playing all these matches in kind of like a hub city. Instead, all those groups that they are going, there's going to be like 8 different groups, and all of those groups that they are in is going to be regionalized, and that there's going to be four teams that is going to be in 5 of those 8 groups, and 5 teams in 3 of those 3 of those 8 groups, and that the top 2 team is going to be moving on into the round of 16, and that it'll be interesting to see how that is going to work out. And also, I'm very interested to see whether or not if the USL Championship might be thinking about having fans back into the stands. Like, when I read about how they're going to restart the season, I didn't hear anything about whether or not if fans can attend games, which I'm assuming most likely they're not going to, especially with the way that pretty much every single sports league, even though they have restarted right now, they still haven't really allowed fans to go back into the stands, and it's just gonna take a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months before they might even think about bringing some fans back into the stands, and only a limited capacity of them in the stadium. Now, sticking with the whole restart, and kind of talk a little bit about the news that's related to COVID-19. Well, we unfortunately have another couple of teams that has saw their player got tested positive from COVID-19. The Colorado Rapids and FC Dallas now join teams like Inter Miami, Atlanta, and I believe DC United as the team that unfortunately have their player tested positive of COVID-19. And these kind of thing I think is going to just continue to increase. And I know some people will say, well, now with more teams that is going to be tested positive for COVID-19, do we think that might have any kind of problem in terms of the MLSisback tournament? I don't think so, because I think what these teams are going to do is that if they know that players have got tested positive for COVID-19, they'll just automatically isolate them for 14 days, and that they won't be involved with any team's action, and that I don't think there's going to be any trouble because of that. So as much as I know there are more teams that have announced that their players are getting tested positive for COVID-19, as long as these team, when they announced that only like one or two players have been tested positive, and they haven't really found that player kind of spread that virus to other teammates and kind of have a little bit breakout in terms of their own team. I don't think this tournament is going to be canceled because of the fact that we're getting more news that players are getting infected. And also, I don't think the tournament might not be canceled because of the fact that what's going on in Florida, and that I know there's a lot of people that is concerned about the cases that is just ballooning right now in Florida with the whole COVID-19 cases. Well, as long as if MLS is comfortable of thinking that they are going to able to safely play this tournament without having these players to potentially catch the virus, then they're going to happen. And it's not like these players, I'm assuming once these players does arrive in Orlando, I know most of these teams are telling their players that they can only stay in that facility and they can't go anywhere in Orlando. That means you basically just have kind of a control kind of facility where everybody is kind of like in this bubble, and that they're not allowed to leave this bubble to potentially spread the virus. And if there is one player that unfortunately get infected by this virus, they'll just immediately remove from the bubble and immediately self-isolate themselves. So yeah, for all those people that are concerned that this tournament is not going to take place, don't be that concerned yet until the fact that MLS is going to maybe think about announcing what they're going to do and whether or not if they're going to delay this tournament in these next couple of days leading up to the tournament. Now, Jozy Altidore have returned to individual voluntary training in Canada, but can't train with the full team for 2 weeks. And apparently he was staying at his home in Florida, and now he decided to go back to Canada and decided to do some training with his team. And since Canada has their own rules in terms of how players or just visitor coming back into their country, which I think they have a very strict rule of the fact that if you decide to come to our country, you have to self-isolate for at least 2 weeks, and that is exactly what Jozy Altidore is doing right now. Although TFC says that he is allowed to do individual voluntary training, and that after that 2-week period of him getting self-isolated is over, that's when he can of course join the teams for his full team training. And I wonder, is that going to really affect in terms of how TFC is going to play in their first couple of matches? Because knowing the fact that Jozy Altidore might not be up to fitness and might not have the advantage of training the training with the team itself, is that going to be a circumstances where he might actually not be starting in some of these games, and that he might actually maybe come off the bench in some of these games due to the fact that he's a little bit behind in terms of the training schedule, unlike his teammate right now with that club. The Quakes also become the first team to touch down in Orlando for full team training, and this is definitely not a big surprise because the Quakes are one of the last, if not the last team that is still in what I say the first stage of MLS restarting, which is their players are still only doing individual voluntary training. And I know Santa Clara County, there is no way in the world they're allowing the team to do full training until maybe at least for another couple of weeks or even in a couple of months. So instead, I thought the Quakes, they're going to have to do the next best thing, which is either move to a different county to do their full team training, or be the first team to arrive in Orlando to do the full team training, which that is exactly what they are going to do that. And hopefully with them being the first team to touch down in Orlando with the full team training, this will be a way for them to kind of catch up in terms of getting these players back into fitness, because they are definitely behind everyone in terms of players getting back to their fitness and doing these kind of full team training that pretty much every single MLS team have been trying to do. Now, moving away from the whole COVID-19 kind of news, well, actually, there are still a couple of news that is related to that, but for this news, next news has kind of nothing to do with COVID-19, but more to do with contract extension, as we saw 2 players today receive contract extension, and that of course is Richie Rea and Andrew Farrell. Both signed multi-year contract extension with their respective team. I'm not quite sure how many years both of these players have signed their multi-year contract with their respective team, but definitely well deserved for both of these players to get multi-year contract. Richie Rea, I talk about how he is definitely a player that I am keeping a close eye on, because he's definitely a player that could potentially be a very decent player for TFC and could be one of the most promising youngster in the league. And Andrew Farrell, who has been a veteran for that Revs back line, and it only makes sense the fact that they will have to sign him to a multi-year contract, considering his experience and that he's been one of the better center back option for the Revs for the last couple of years. But moving on, in terms of the next news, and kind of now go back to talk about something that's related to COVID-19. Nicholas Acevedo has finally joined NYCFC after travel restriction have eased. So he was actually arriving to New York from Uruguay, and since there is some travel restriction in terms of him potentially leaving Uruguay, or the fact that he is coming into New York, that is the reason why he wasn't able to join NYCFC for a bit. Now, I'm not quite sure is he available to train with the full team, and that I think he might be in the same situation that Josie Altidore is in, where I know New York has a rule where if you decided to go to their city, you are automatically have to isolate yourself for two weeks, and that I wonder if that's going to be the same thing for him, where he's going to have to isolate himself for 2 weeks, and that he won't be able to join NYCFC in terms of their full team training until that 2-week isolation period is going to be over. And finally, the National Soccer Hall of Fame induction has been postponed. This kind of is a little bit of a surprise, considering they announced that the National Soccer Hall of Fame induction in Frisco, Texas is going to be in September, and this seems like a very kind of early announcement of saying that they are going to be postponing the induction. And the other thing that kind of surprised me is, why couldn't they do this induction in kind of like a remote places? I mean, I've been hearing these other Hall of Fame induction in other sports league where they're kind of hosting in a remote kind of places, and that they're not actually taking place where the Hall of Fame is. So why not the National Soccer Hall of Fame does that, and that instead of doing it at Frisco, Texas, they should just do it kind of remotely and just kind of welcome some of these new members first inducted into the National Soccer Hall of Fame. But other than that, they said that they're going to be postponed, and there is no date of whether or there's no date of when exactly they are going to be postponed to. But there you have it. That is pretty much it for the news of the week. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this video? What do you think of all these news on the board? And as always, if I didn't mention an important news that has happened in MLS for the past couple of days on the board, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.